Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I thought I would go through some books that I think would be pretty perfect for autumn and or winter. I did think about doing two separate videos with autumn recommendations and winter recommendations, but I know what I'm like. I knew that I would be too lazy to film two separate videos, so I'm going to smush them into one. I hope that's okay, but I think that a lot of these books would be good for either season anyway. Yeah, I think half of these books are thrillers, and then I also have a few fantasies, and then a few books that just generally have really good atmosphere, or that have a colder setting, or that have spooky vibes, because those are the books that I think of when I think of this time of year. I've also tried to include a mix of books that I read recently and also books that I haven't mentioned much on my channel, just so that there's a little bit of variety. I will have timestamps in the description just in case you did want to skip ahead at any point, and I'll also leave a link actually to a video that I made earlier this year that was specifically about thrillers. I did think about including some of the books on that list in this list, but then I also thought, what's the point in duplicating books that I've already mentioned in a recommendations video? So I'll leave that linked as well, just in case you haven't seen it yet. I'm not actually sure how many books I put on this list. I think there's 10, but I am just going to talk until my camera battery runs out, so there might be less than 10. We'll see how it goes. But the first book that I wanted to talk about is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This is a really difficult book to explain because it's kind of a mix of a few different genres. I would describe it as a literary mystery thriller that also has horror vibes, and the plot is very vague when you look at the synopsis, but essentially it follows a few different perspectives. The main perspective being a guy called Ted who lives in this house on Needless Street, and he's described as being a bit of a loner. He lives with his cat Olivia, and you get his perspective but also the perspective of the cat, which is pretty much what sold the book to me, because I really liked the idea of reading a thriller that was told partly from the perspective of a cat. I know that some people would not like that at all, but I thought it was really unique. I'd never read a book that was told from the point of view of a cat before, and I really liked the way that that played into the story as a whole. The other perspective, the other main perspective that you're following, is a woman called Dee, and she's trying to work out what happened to her sister who went missing when they were kids. I think it was around 10 years ago. I think what I liked most about this book was the atmosphere. It was definitely creepy in places, and at one point I thought I had worked out what was going on in this book, and I had, but also there was a lot more to it than that. It does have a very slow start, and I found that there was a part in the middle where it was starting to drag just a little bit, and where I was kind of frustrated because I had so many questions and we weren't getting many answers. However, I did think that the ending was worth persisting, and it is a unique thriller. It's definitely memorable. It's one that has stuck with me even though it's been a few months since I finished it, and so if you are looking for a thriller that's like that, then this is one that I would recommend. The next book on my list is Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. This is a courtroom mystery thriller that follows a few different characters. It's told from many points of view, and it all links into this court case. So you learn in the prologue or the first chapter that there was this oxygen chamber that was being operated in this town, and it was owned by a Korean immigrant family. So they have these patients that come along and they sit in this pressurized oxygen chamber, and it's meant to help with a range of different conditions like infertility and autism. However, you learn in the first chapter that this chamber exploded and it killed 2 people that were inside, and so the court case picks up a year later, where you see the present day timeline, but you also see flashbacks where you learn what actually happened. I think what I liked most about this book was that even though the mystery element was really good, because there were so many twists and turns, and I kept changing my mind on who I thought was responsible, so I really liked that aspect, but I also really liked how it was a lot more than that, because one of the main themes that the book explores is how it feels to be an immigrant living in America. It was also quite difficult to read in places because it also looks at how it feels to be a parent of an autistic child, and I believe that the author is a lawyer, so the legal aspects of the book did feel very authentic. And I'm also pretty sure I read an interview with the author where she spoke about how she and her child also went through HBOT therapy, as in the book. I think if you liked Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng and you haven't read this book yet, then I would recommend it, because I felt like they had a similar tone. The next book on my list is is One by One by Ruth Ware. So this is a cozy murder mystery that follows a tech company who are on this corporate retreat, I think in the Alps, where they're staying in this remote ski chalet. However, not long after they arrive, there's an avalanche and they end up being trapped in this ski lodge. And it's a murder mystery, so you can probably guess what happens. The book is called One by One, so they end up being killed off one by one. Like, it's not a spoiler, it's written on the back of the book. I really enjoyed this one. I read it quite recently as part of a buddy read with my friend Helen, and it was a really fun book to buddy read because we kept coming up with different theories on what we thought was happening. I wouldn't say that I loved it as much as The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, even though it's not the kind of thriller that has a lot of really shocking twists and turns. I really like the tension and the atmosphere, and it does have that cold setting, which I think makes it pretty perfect to read over the winter. The only thing I will say is that I didn't like any of the characters because most of the people that work for this tech company are awful. They are not very nice. It reminded me a little bit of The Guest List by Lucy Foley. However, I did enjoy this one a lot more. The next book on my list is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. So this is a romantic thriller that follows a woman called Sydney who lives in this neighbourhood that is being gentrified, and she starts to suspect that something sinister is happening to the black people in this neighbourhood that have supposedly moved away, but Sydney thinks that there might be something else going on. What I really liked about this book was the atmosphere, but also how it has this slow burning tension throughout the book. It's told from two different perspectives, so you follow Sydney, but also this guy called Theo, I want to say his name is, and he's helping her to research the history of this neighbourhood for a walking tour that she's planning to start running. I thought it was also really interesting how this book combines a few different genres. So it's part thriller, but also part horror and part romance, which I don't think I've ever read a romantic thriller before, but it was definitely interesting. The only thing I will say is that the ending to this did feel just a little bit rushed, and it had a very different tone to the start of the book. And so it was a little bit disappointing, but it wasn't enough for me to hate the book overall, and I would still recommend it. Okay, so those are all the mystery thrillers on my list, and next I'm going to move on to a historical fiction, and that is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. So this is historical fiction, as I think I said, that's set in Iceland during 1829, and it follows a woman called Agnes who's sentenced to death for the part that she played in a murder that happened the year before, and she's sent to live with this family on their farm while she's waiting for her execution date. I believe that this is actually based on a true story, but throughout the book you learn more about Agnes's life, and you also see how the family react to her being in their home. I think what I liked most about this book, other than the atmosphere, was definitely the setting. So it's set in this small community in rural Iceland, and I do tend to like books that are like that because Iceland is one of my all-time favourite countries that I've ever been to, and so I really like books that are set there because I can definitely picture the landscape in my mind. It's a very haunting story, and I think that if you're interested in historical fiction, even if you don't read a lot of it, then I would recommend this one. It's only about 300 and something pages. Even though it's quite character driven and there's not a lot of action, I found that because I felt so immersed in the atmosphere, then I read it quite quickly. The next book on my list is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. So this is contemporary fiction or literary fiction that centres around a small town in Sweden where everyone is obsessed with hockey, and in particular the junior hockey team are under quite a lot of pressure because they're in the running to win the hockey league, and if they do win, then that would be a really good thing for the town because it would bring in a lot of tourism and that would create a lot of jobs, and so there's a lot of pressure on these boys to succeed. However, there's this incident that happens about halfway through the book that completely divides the town, and so the story kind of follows the fallout to that. I won't say exactly what happens because I think that some people might consider that a spoiler. I wouldn't consider it a spoiler because it is a pretty big trigger warning. So if you are thinking of reading this, then I would recommend looking up the trigger warnings beforehand if you do want to know what they are. What I liked most about this book though was the way that Fredrik Backman built this community and how the different characters' perspectives contributed to the story. Just in general, I do really like Fredrik Backman's writing and the way that he approaches certain topics. I think that if you like contemporary fiction and you haven't read anything by Fredrik Backman, then I would recommend giving this book a go. It was the first book that I read by him, and I think that of his books, even though it's not my favourite, it is the book that I would recommend the most for reading over the winter because it does have that colder setting. Next, I'm going to move on to the fantasy books on my list, starting with The Diviners by Libba Bray. So this is a series that I really need to continue because I read the first book last year and I gave it 5 stars and I really enjoyed it, but I am useless apparently at continuing series. So I think this is one that I definitely need to prioritise for next year, because even just thinking about it now and remembering how much I enjoyed this book, it's a historical fantasy kind of. So it's set in New York during the 1920s and it follows a few different characters, but the main character that you're following is a girl called Evie, and I can't remember where she's from, but she gets into a bit of trouble back home and her parents decide to send her to live in New York with her uncle, and he's helping the police to investigate after a woman is found murdered. And Evie asks if she can help with the investigation because she has this psychic ability that could end up being really useful. Really enjoyed the atmosphere in this one, and I felt like I'd been transported back in time to the 1920s when you had Prohibition and Flapper Girls, and I felt that the characters were really well written in terms of their personalities. I think if you're looking for a fantasy that has those spooky paranormal vibes, then I definitely recommend this one. Next on my list is a book that I feel always ends up on this type of recommendations video, but I'm going to include it because I do agree that it's pretty perfect for this time of year, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This is a historical fantasy that's inspired by Russian folklore, and it follows a main character called Vasya who lives in this remote village in Russia with her family, and she has this ability to see these spirits that not many other people can see. The story really starts when Vasya's dad remarries and also a new priest moves to town, and Vasya's new stepmom and also this priest try to convert the villagers and they stop believing in these spirits, and that starts to cause problems, and Vasya is the only person who can really help and protect her village from the evil spirits that live in the forest. I feel like I've done a really terrible job of explaining this book, but this is the first book in a series, and I think that the first book was my favourite in the series. I did enjoy the series as a whole. It was a little bit slow in places, but the writing is beautiful. And I think that if you're looking for a historical fantasy that has a really good atmosphere, then I would recommend this series. Next on my list is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. And this is a book that I think covers a few different genres because it's a dark academia mystery that also has a fantasy twist. And the story basically follows a character called Alex Stern who's recruited to go to Yale University because she has this ability to see ghosts, and she's recruited by this organisation who basically monitor the secret societies at Yale who can use different types of magic. When a girl in the local town is found murdered, Alex then has to investigate to see whether one of the secret societies is responsible, but you also throughout the book learn a lot more about Alex's past, and it gets very dark in places. Huge trigger warnings for this book in general, so I would recommend looking them up if you are thinking of reading this. I wasn't sure about recommending this book at first because it's the first book in a series, and at the moment we have no idea when the next book is going to come out. It also took me a really long time to get into the story because it's told from 2 different perspectives, and also there's a few different timelines, and there's a whole series of flashbacks that tell a completely separate story, which yeah, it was a little bit confusing at first, but once I was into it, I was into it. And just in general, I really love Leigh Bardugo's writing, and I really liked the way that the mystery unfolded. The final book on my list is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. So the main reason that I'm recommending this is because it has those paranormal themes that I think would be perfect for spooky season and just in general for this time of year. This is another series where I've read the first book and I haven't continued yet, but I would definitely like to. This book is set in, I think, a parallel world where clairvoyancy is illegal, and there's this underground network of clairvoyants who operate in secret because they don't want to be caught by the government, obviously. And the main character that you're following is a girl called Paige Mahoney, and she is clairvoyant. and she's captured right at the start of the book, and the story follows her as she's taken out of London to a place where clairvoyants are taken after they're captured. And I don't really want to say much more than that because I feel like that would be edging into spoiler territory, but the tone of this book was a lot darker than I was expecting, and it's quite brutal in places. Paige goes through a lot of trauma, so just something to be aware of if you are thinking of reading this book. I think that this book is often categorised as young adult, but the themes are quite adult, and also the magic system is really complicated. Even after finishing the first book, I'm still not convinced that I fully got my head around everything, but I have heard that it does get easier as the books go on. And also there's a prequel novella that you can read first, that I chose to read first because I'd heard that it was helpful, or that it would be helpful. Bad grammar there, but I read the prequel first, and I did find that that helped me to understand some of the magic system, and especially the character relationships. The only thing I will say is that because this book was published, I think nearly 10 years ago, it did have a few tropes that meant that it was a little bit predictable. However, I could see that there was huge potential for me to enjoy the rest of the series because I did really like the characters. Okay, so I think that does bring me to the end of the video, so thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, I've been talking for a really long time and my throat just does not feel good, but yeah, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Also, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye.